So this research I'm going to be presenting to you today is based on data that was collected in 2006. And there's been a lot of articles written on this, based on the analysis of this data. One in particular where we showed that reparation in Bosnia, one of the elements of reparation in Bosnia that is particularly supported, at least by the sample in that survey, was more symbolic forms of reparation. And in 2006, the idea was to kind of look at challenging all these assumptions that were behind international criminal justice and the presumptions related to what it could offer to the people in Bosnia, in Serbia, and in all the other former Yugoslav countries. And looking at all that, I started getting interested with Stéphane Parmentier in Leuven on the nuances that you would have within the need for symbolic forms of justice. And what does it mean, justice, redress, reparation, social transformation for people who've been affected by a conflict? And I want to say that I'm going to refer to the word victim, but I don't mean by victim the classical definition. I mean by that people who've been affected by the conflict. Because victimhood in Bosnia, but in other post-conflict countries, is a very broad term or feeling or identity. So now, symbolic forms of justice. What do I mean? Does it work? No. Okay, so I have to go there. Sorry. Doesn't seem to work. So what do I mean by symbolic forms of justice? Just to be very, very quick. So localized, non-judicial measures that are context and experience specific. They are symbolic in nature. So I'm not going to be looking at compensation, restitution, even though there's a lot of literature saying that, they're also symbolic. But I'm just going to be more focused on measures such as those that you see there. But of course, looking at what was measured in that survey. Now, symbolic forms of justice are considered within literature in general as markers of acknowledgement. They symbolically acknowledge people's suffering. They provide voice. They can provide voice, status. They can represent a social recognition of harm doing also. They're also markers of meaning and of narratives of the past. They can represent specific memories, and we've talked a lot about it. And they can, of course, also express very conflicting narratives. And this is relevant to Bosnia, of course. Now, there are two dimensions in general that are put forward as being significant in this symbolic recognition that such forms of justice can bring. The first is acknowledgement of suffering, and that is the idea of restoring the identity of a person affected by a conflict, including that person in the moral community. But it's also this idea of acknowledging something that I'm getting from somebody else, whether it's society or individuals. On the other hand, you can also have truth-telling, personal truth-telling, which is more, and we talked about it in the panel before, making sense of the suffering that is undeserved. You need to make sense of it. You need to create a narrative which is meaningful. But, of course, these forms of justice are not only a form of symbolic recognition, they're also a form of social action. It's also about moving beyond victimhood. One talks about cognitive recovery, for example. And this is also important. Now, as I said, there are a lot of different justice needs within a post-conflict setting. And within these justice needs, there are power struggles and structural complexities that are inherent to these justice needs. And this, of course, is relevant also to Bosnia. Now, this heterogeneity of justice needs is related, on the one hand, of course, to the nature of exposure to violence, but it's also related to identity concerns and processes. And again, it is relevant to Bosnia. I'm not going to go through the whole literature for you, but knowing that, yeah, there's social, there's spaces for the socio-political recognition of certain sufferings, and not all of them. And a lot of collectives or individuals are marginalized. Their experiences, their narratives of the past are marginalized. Their hierarchies and competitive victimhood, and so on. So now, given all this, and knowing that in order to know more about what people need in a more context-specific and a more local vision of justice, we need to talk to them, we need to ask them, but we need to also account for these nuances. Now, within the survey data that we had, I thought maybe let's see if there are respondents who are more likely to be only supporting one or another form of symbolic justice. So I looked at acknowledgement of suffering and means of truth-telling as the two dimensions. And the idea was to look at people who were supporting either both the pro-symbolic, not supporting either, supporting only one, pro-acknowledgement, or supporting only pro-truth. And trying to see within these groups, I mean, at least for the first thing, could I have 4 groups? And then, what was really characterizing them in terms of experiences of conflict, beliefs, and demographics. Now, so just to be very quick, I'm not going to talk about the statistics here. If you have any questions, you let me know. But basically, I used 2 mean scores aggregated from these 4 measures. Found out 4 groups: pro-symbolic, anti-symbolic, acknowledgement, and truth-telling. And as you can see, they're quite well balanced. I was surprised. I thought there would be maybe more people on the pro-symbolic or more on the acknowledgement one. So, and now, looking first at experiences of victimization. Well, as you can see, what really characterizes the pro-symbolic group is massive levels of persecution and by an armed group. So there's a persecution by a probably state-led group, or at least a group with a certain vision, a certain motive for persecution. Very high physical suffering, enduring. Anti-symbolic are the ones who are the least likely to have suffered, or at least to have reported having suffered, and at least in that form. Acknowledgement, they're a bit less than pro-symbolic, and truth-telling, what really is characterizing for them is that they've gone through less forced displacement. Now, looking now at more at the beliefs. Whoa, I'm going to be quick. So, looking at the beliefs, the pro-symbolics, as you can see, what really characterize them, and they're very opposite to anti-symbolics. But they're the ones who are blaming the outgroup. The justice, the beliefs that they have, the conflict-maintaining beliefs that they have are really against the outgroup. they are the ones who support the most. And they also don't want to include the out-group within the truth-telling forum. So where can you tell the truth? I can tell the truth everywhere. People can tell the truth everywhere, their truth, but we don't want the out-group in there. Acknowledgement, they are not against really the out-group, but they are for a exclusive form of victimhood, of truth, but only for victims, basically. And it has to be in the court, not in public events. It's their arena. So, and the truth-telling group is the one who's the most, I would say, global in its vision. They want to blame the whole society for what's going on. They are inclusive of the out-group, they're inclusive of all agents, whether it's victims or perpetrators. But you see, it makes sense because truth-telling, if you're only supporting truth-telling and you really want to have this interaction, you just don't want to receive, but you want to interact. So it makes sense in the whole picture. Now, to be very brief, one thing, in terms of demographics, the pro-symbolic are more likely to be Bosnian Muslims, which makes perfect sense if you look at the patterns of experiences and beliefs. And in this case, of course, since they're the most likely to have been victims of persecution, they're more likely to display a sense of collective trauma. Social repair for them is really of essence. They need a group-oriented recognition. And support for the ICTY and court-based justice is in line with the narratives that come out from these communities that we can see in previous research. And, but they're also the ones who are less inclined to positive attitudes about the future in that sample. The anti-symbolic ones, so they are the least likely to have had participation in the conflict, least persecution. They blame the whole society. They may have more political concerns. What I instinctively also presume, but I cannot really, I couldn't test it in this measure, is that these are also maybe the people who are more concerned by current injustice, current forms of non-recognition, which are war-related, but which are in the present.
Can you finish?
Yeah. Give me one more minute, and then I'm done. I was prepared for 12 minutes. So,
well,
so anyway.
You already can pass minutes.
I'll give you just to be very quick. The truth-telling ones are very inclusive, and they are probably the most likely to be interested also in looking at moral accountability, and not only the individual accountability related to the war. So, to be very quick, that's it. And just a very last reflection. Well, for one thing, I think really what this shows is that that these justice needs are just not based on ethno-national affiliations. It's much more complex than that. There are intersections between them. I think there's a complementarity between judicial and non-judicial that has to be acknowledged, but giving the right place to each objective. So victims will not be recognized by justice in the way they would like to be recognized, at least in these forms. But it is important for them to have judicial forms of justice. Potential for more informal channels for the expression of acknowledgement of personal truth and suffering is certainly important. And I'd like to stress storytelling initiatives in particular, oral history. I did some research on that. And yeah, current structural inequalities and injustices are really important, and they have to be taken into account within this. Otherwise, they're going to undermine the whole justice, transitional justice process. Thank you very much.